You are standing in your backyard right now. Look at that pile of sand near your shed, the one you've been meaning to do something with for 3 years. What if I told you that pile, mixed with something your body produces for free every single day, could harden into real stone, not metaphor? Actual stone you can build a wall with. Urine turns sand into solid rock. No cement, no heat, no cost. And the Amish families I visited in Holmes County, Ohio, have been quietly using versions of this for generations, passed down from a time when buying bags of Portland cement meant admitting you couldn't figure something out yourself. Stick with me until the end, because there's a 2010 research breakthrough from Professor Jason DeJong at UC Davis that confirmed what old builders already knew, and it works on the foundation your house is sitting on right now, whether you built it last year or in 1952. The first time I saw this happen with my own eyes was on a humid July afternoon outside Berlin, Ohio. An older Amish man named Mervyn was showing me the base of a small outbuilding his grandfather helped pour before the Second World War. I crouched down and ran my hand across the bottom course. It felt like sandstone, smooth, dense, cool to the touch. I asked him what the mix was. He smiled the way those men do when they know you're about to have a bad day for your wallet. He said sand, time, and what the animals left behind. I drove home to Pennsylvania that night, genuinely annoyed. I'd spent 41 years of my life paying for things I didn't need to pay for. And this was just one more on the list. Here's what's actually happening when urine meets sand, because you deserve to understand the mechanism before you trust it. Urine contains urea, a lot of it, roughly 20 grams per liter on a normal day. When urea comes into contact with a common bacteria called Sporosarcina pasteurii, which lives naturally in most soils in North America, the bacteria produces an enzyme called urease. That enzyme breaks the urea apart into ammonium and carbonate. The carbonate then grabs onto calcium ions in the sand and crystallizes into calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate is the exact same mineral that makes up limestone. Limestone is the exact same rock that built the pyramids, the Roman aqueducts, and half the stone barns in Lancaster County. So when I say urine turns sand into stone, I'm not being cute. The chemistry produces actual limestone, grain by grain, locking the sand particles together into a solid matrix. Geologists call the natural version of this process beach rock. Walk any tropical coastline, and you'll find sandy beaches that have turned to stone right where the tide meets the animals. Same process, different scale. Now here's where it gets interesting, and where the suppression part of this story starts to show itself. In 2010, a civil engineering team led by Professor Jason DeJong at the University of California, Davis, published a paper in the journal Ecological Engineering showing that this process, which they called microbial-induced calcite precipitation, or MICP, could cement loose sand into a material with the compressive strength of weak concrete in about a week. 1 week, with a solution that was essentially urea, calcium, and bacteria. The construction industry noticed. They noticed so hard that within 5 years, 3 separate startups had patented variations of the process and started selling it as a premium green technology for roughly $80 per square foot of treated soil. The raw ingredients cost pennies. The markup exists because most people do not know the ingredients are in their bodies and their backyards. But the Amish knew, or rather, their grandfathers knew, because the European stonemasons who settled Lancaster County in the 1700s brought with them a tradition of what they called pissed mortar. I found a reference to it in an 1874 USDA agricultural bulletin discussing traditional German farmstead construction. The document notes that stable urine aged in wooden casks, was commonly mixed with river sand and slaked lime to produce a mortar of exceptional durability. Aged in wooden casks, printed by the United States government, and then quietly forgotten the moment Portland cement factories started lobbying railroad companies for shipping contracts. Someone benefited from you not knowing this. Someone built a very large house on the profit margin between what a bag of cement costs and what it should cost, and that someone funded the trade associations that wrote the standards that told your contractor what he was allowed to use. Here's how to actually do it on a small scale this weekend in your own yard. You'll need clean sand, play sand from any hardware store works, though river sand is better because the grain shapes interlock. You'll need a source of urea, which can be your own urine collected over a few days, or agricultural urea fertilizer, which costs about $30 for a 50-pound bag and will treat an enormous volume of sand. You'll need a calcium source, and the cheapest one is calcium chloride, the same product sold as ice melt in winter, and you'll need the bacteria, which you already have. It's in your soil. A handful of garden dirt mixed into the solution inoculates it. Mix your urea and calcium chloride into water at roughly equal parts, about a cup of each per gallon. Add your handful of soil, stir it, let it sit overnight so the bacteria wake up and multiply. The next day, pour the solution slowly through a form filled with damp sand. Let it drain. Pour again the next day and the next. After about 7 to 10 days of this, depending on temperature, warmer is faster, you'll be able to pull the form away and tap on something that used to be loose sand and now rings like stone. I tested this myself in a plastic shoebox behind my garage last summer. I used play sand, agricultural urea, pool-grade calcium chloride, and a scoop of dirt from my tomato bed. On day 9, I tipped the shoebox upside down and a block of sandstone fell out onto my workbench. I hit it with a hammer. It cracked like a rock, not like a sandcastle. I still have the pieces on a shelf in the shop. Now, if you already own a house and you're thinking this only applies to people building from scratch, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. The foundation under your home is almost certainly sitting on soil that has a weakness somewhere, a spot where water has washed fines out from under the footing, a corner where the ground has settled a quarter inch, a crack in the basement wall where moisture keeps finding its way back in. Conventional repair means calling a foundation contractor who will quote you between $8,000 and $25,000 to inject polyurethane foam or drive steel piers into the earth. I know because I paid $14,000 for exactly that service on my previous home in 2009, and the crack came back in 2013. What Professor DeJong's team demonstrated and what several follow-up studies at Montana State University confirmed through 2018 is that the same MICP solution poured or pumped into soil beneath a settling foundation will cement that soil in place. The bacteria travel through the pore spaces. The calcite precipitates between the grains. The loose, washed-out dirt under your footing becomes sandstone permanently. For an existing home, the application is simple enough that a homeowner can do it over a weekend with a garden sprayer and a length of half-inch PVC pipe. You drill a small hole, 3/8 of an inch is plenty, through your basement slab or into the soil beside an exterior footing where you suspect erosion. You insert the pipe. You pour the solution in slowly, a gallon at a time, over the course of several days, letting it soak outward between pores. The solution follows the path of least resistance, which is exactly the same path the water followed when it hollowed the space out in the first place. The bacteria colonize the void. The calcium carbonate fills it. In 2 weeks, that void is sandstone. I watched a man named Amos near Mount Hope, Ohio, do this under the corner of a dairy barn his father built in 1961. The corner had sunk almost half an inch over 60 years. He didn't jack it up. He just stabilized what was underneath so it would sink no further. He used urine from his milking parlor collection system, lime from his agricultural supply, and dirt from the floor of the barn itself. Total cost for materials was under $15. The barn has not moved since. That was in 2018. Therefore, if you have a crack in your basement wall, a sinking front step, a cracked slab in your garage, or a low spot in your driveway that keeps getting lower, you have sitting inside you and sitting in your yard every ingredient needed to fix it without hiring anyone. But I want to be honest about the limits, because I don't respect anyone who oversells. This method builds compressive strength, resistance to being crushed. It does not build much tensile strength, resistance to being pulled apart. So you can make blocks, pavers, foundation fills, garden walls, root cellar linings, retaining courses, fire pit rings, and repair fills. You should not make suspension bridges. The strength of a good MICP block, measured in the UC Davis studies, runs between 500 and 2,000 pounds per square inch of compressive strength depending on how many treatment cycles you put it through. Regular concrete runs 3,000 to 4,000 psi, so it is roughly half as strong as concrete at the high end. But half as strong as concrete, for essentially free, is an extraordinary trade. And here is where the story gets a little darker before it gets better. I want you to understand why none of this information reached you through normal channels, because that understanding changes what you do next. In 1902, Thomas Edison, yes, that Edison, founded the Edison Portland Cement Company in New Jersey. He built the longest rotary kiln in the world, at the time 150 feet long, and he poured every dollar of marketing he had into convincing Americans that proper construction meant Portland cement. Before Edison's campaign, roughly 60% of farm buildings in the United States used some form of traditional mortar, lime-based, sometimes urine-modified, sometimes mixed with animal hair or plant fibers. By 1930, that number had dropped below 10%. Not because the old methods failed, because the new ones were marketed harder and subsidized by railroads that made money shipping heavy bag product. The knowledge didn't disappear, it just got pushed to the edges. To the Amish, who didn't care what Edison thought, to a handful of stonemasons in Appalachia, to old USDA bulletins that nobody reprinted, to academic papers in the 2010 S that got swallowed by corporate patents before the general public ever heard about them, you were never told. Not because it was secret in a dramatic sense, because nobody profitable had a reason to tell you. Now here is the finale, the piece I promised you at the beginning. The one specific technique that pulls all of this together into something you can do this weekend with almost nothing. I found this in an obscure reference, a 1923 publication called The Farm Builder's Practical Manual, printed by a small agricultural press in Pennsylvania and now held in the Special Collections Archive at Penn State. On page 147, there is a recipe credited to a Pennsylvania Dutch mason named Jacob Hirschberger, who built stone foundations across Lancaster County between roughly from 1880 to 1910. The recipe is called cold stone mortar. I have tested it. It works. You take 1 part aged urine that has been allowed to sit in a covered bucket for at least 2 weeks, which converts the urea into ammonia and ammonium carbonate, essentially preloading the chemistry. You take 1 part wood ash from any hardwood fire, which provides potassium and small amounts of calcium. You take 3 parts clean, sharp sand, and you take 1 part slaked lime, which is garden lime that has been mixed with water and allowed to react, about $10 for a bag that will last you years. Mix these together into a stiff paste, pack it into whatever form you need: a wall, a block, a repair and a crack, a skim coat over old stone. Keep it damp but not wet for the first week. Hirschberger's manual says to cover the work with wet burlap and to wet it every morning with the same admixture used in its making, meaning you pour more diluted urine on it every morning for 7 days. At the end of 2 weeks, you have a mortar that cures to a hardness comparable to weak sandstone and improves with every passing year, because the calcium carbonate crystals continue to grow and interlock for decades. The Amish stone foundations I've seen in Holmes County, some of them laid with variations of this recipe more than a century ago, are harder today than the day they were poured. Test them with a hammer. They ring. They don't crumble. They don't spall. They don't need repointing every 10 years like modern Portland mortar. Jacob Hirschberger died in 1914. His recipe sat in that 1923 manual, forgotten in an archive, while 3 generations of American homeowners paid for cement they didn't need. One community in Pennsylvania and one community in Ohio kept the knowledge alive because they didn't trust the salesman. And now you have it too. You didn't learn something today, you recovered something that was taken from you. Your grandfather's grandfather knew how to turn sand into stone with what his body produced for free, and somewhere along the way, someone decided you shouldn't. If you are the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do next. Tell me in the comments, do you have a crack in a basement wall, a sinking step, or a settling corner you've been quoted thousands of dollars to fix? Just describe it in one line. I read every comment on this channel, and I want to see how many of you are sitting on repairs you can now do yourself for $15. And if you want to keep recovering what was taken, subscribe. There are thousands of us now, men who refuse to keep paying for things our ancestors did for free. Next week, I'm breaking down the Amish method for sealing a stone or concrete foundation against water permanently, using 2 ingredients you almost certainly have in your pantry right now. One of them is salt. The other one will surprise you. Stay skeptical, stay capable, and stop paying for what the earth gives away. Before you close this video, I want to give you the details that separate the men who actually do this from the men who watch and forget, because I can already tell you what's going to happen in the comment section. Half of you are going to ask the same 3 questions, and I'd rather answer them now while you're still here, still paying attention, still holding that mental picture of a cracked basement wall or a settling porch step in your head. The first question is always about smell, and I understand why. The word urine carries a loading that the word urea does not, even though chemically, once the process is underway, you are dealing with the same nitrogen compound. Here is the truth. For the first 48 hours after you pour the solution, there is a faint ammonia odor at the surface. It is less than what you smell when you walk past a gas station restroom. By hour 72, the bacteria have converted the urea into carbonate, and the ammonia has either volatilized or been locked into the crystal structure. By day 5, if you put your nose an inch from the treated sand, you smell wet mineral. Nothing else. I have done this in an enclosed crawl space with 1 small fan running, and my wife, who can smell a mouse die in a wall from 2 rooms away, walked through it on day 4 and asked me what I had been working on. That is the honest answer. If you are treating an outdoor pad or an exterior footing, the smell is a non-issue from the first hour. If you are treating something inside a finished basement, run a box fan toward a cracked window for 3 days, and you will never have a complaint. The second question is about volume. How much liquid does a grown man actually produce? And is it realistic to collect enough to do meaningful work? The average adult male produces between 1.5 and 2 liters of urine per day. Call it half a gallon. Over the course of a week, that is 3.5 gallons from one person. A 5-gallon bucket of sand, fully saturated and cycled 4 times over 10 days, needs roughly 2 gallons of solution total when you factor in the calcium chloride brine and the urea concentrate. So one man drinking normal amounts of water can solidify a 5-gallon volume of sand every 4 days without any special effort. A household of 3 adults and a teenager can easily produce enough to pour a small footing in a weekend. The Dutch microbiologist Henk Jonkers, who did some of the foundational work on bacterial concrete at Delft University in 2006, calculated that the nitrogen waste from a single family of 4, properly captured, could produce roughly 1 cubic meter of biocemented material per month. That is 35 cubic feet. That is a serviceable garden wall, a set of steps, a shed pad, a root cellar floor every single month for free, going down the drain right now in your house. The third question is about strength, and this is where I want you to pay close attention because the strength numbers are the reason the industry has worked so hard to keep this quiet. A standard bag of Quick-Ret, mixed properly and cured for 28 days, tests at roughly 3,000 pounds per square inch of compressive strength. High-grade structural concrete used in bridges and high rises runs between 4,000 and 6,000 psi. Biocemented sand, using the method in that 1,923 manual, and refined by researchers at Murdoch University in Western Australia in a series of papers published between 2009 and 2014, tests between 1,400 and 2,600 psi, depending on cycle count and calcium source. That is not structural concrete. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you it is. You are not going to pour a second-story balcony with this, but for a basement crack repair, for a settling step, for a pier pad under a shed, for a garden retaining wall, for sealing a gap around a foundation penetration, 2,000 psi is double what you need and triple what most of those failures require. The Roman harbor at Caesarea, built in 22 BC under Herod the Great using a marine cement that worked on similar carbonate precipitation principles in seawater, is still standing under 40 feet of Mediterranean water 2,047 years later. Let that number sit with you. 2,047 years. Meanwhile, the Silver Bridge at Point Pleasant, West Virginia, built in 1928 with modern Portland cement and steel, collapsed in 1967 and killed 46 people. 39 years. We traded permanence for speed, and then we forgot we had ever known how to build the other way. Now let me tell you what happens next, because this is the part they really don't want you thinking about. Once you have done this once you have watched loose sand turn into something you cannot break with a hammer, something shifts in you. You start looking at the estimates differently. You start looking at the contractor's truck differently. You start looking at the hardware store aisle with the 50-pound bags stacked to the ceiling, and you see it for what it is: a toll booth on a road that used to be free. I had a man write me last spring. His name is Daryl. He lives outside Chattanooga, and he sent me photographs of a retaining wall his father had paid a contractor $11,000 to build in 1994. It failed in 2019. The contractor was dead. The warranty was worthless. Daryl got 3 new quotes. The lowest was $14,600, and instead, he spent 1 weekend and $41 in calcium chloride and treated the failed section himself using the method I just described. He sent me a picture taken 18 months later. You cannot tell where the repair ends and the original wall begins, except that the repaired section is the only part that isn't cracking again. $41, $14,600, that is the gap. That is the theft. That is what 3 generations of forgetting has cost the American homeowner, multiplied across every basement and every garage floor and every sinking porch in every town in this country. I want to address the skeptics directly before I close, because I know some of you are sitting there with your arms crossed saying, this sounds too good to be true. Good. Stay that way. Skepticism is the immune system of a free mind. But skepticism means you test the claim, not that you dismiss it. So here is what I want you to do. Do not take my word for any of this. Go to Google Scholar, not regular Google, Google Scholar, and type in the phrase microbially induced calcite precipitation. You will get over 4,000 peer-reviewed papers, the earliest from the 1970s, the most recent from last month. Read the abstracts, look at the institutions: Stanford, MIT Delft, Murdoch, the National University of Singapore, the University of Colorado Boulder, where a researcher named Will Srubar has been growing what he calls living bricks since 2017 and selling the technology to the Department of Defense for forward operating base construction. This is not fringe. This is not pseudoscience. This is mainstream materials engineering that has been hidden from the residential consumer, because the residential consumer is worth more to the cement industry as a captive customer than as an informed one. The Portland Cement Association, headquartered in Skokie, Illinois, has a lobbying budget that exceeded $12 million in 2022 alone. Think about what $12 million a year buys you. It buys you building codes written in language that excludes alternative materials. It buys you inspectors trained only on the approved products. It buys you the quiet removal of the 1923 USDA Farmers Bulletin from the active publication list. It buys you forgetting. So fix your crack this weekend. Spend the $15. Watch the sand turn to stone in your own hand and feel what your great-grandfather felt the first time he did it on a homestead in Kansas, or a holler in West Virginia, or a dairy farm in Wisconsin. That feeling, that specific feeling of, I just did this myself and I will never pay someone else to do it again, is the feeling they have spent a century trying to breed out of American men. Get it back. Pass it to your son, pass it to your daughter, pass it to the neighbor who just got a $22,000 quote to underpin his garage. Because the knowledge only stays alive if we refuse to let it die again. I will see you next week for the SALT method. Until then, remember what the Amish elder said to me the afternoon I drove home from Lancaster County with my notebook full and my worldview cracked wide open. He said, the English pay for everything twice, once with money and once with the forgetting, don't pay twice, not anymore.